Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be going all the way back to 1992. This was the year that Genesis informed us that they could not dance, and the shaman told us about some good bloke called Ebenezer. Now 1992 would also mark the debut of Games Master on British television, one of, if not the first show on British television dedicated entirely to video games, and certainly one of the most successful, with it having a sizable impact on an entire generation. That said, we are not here to talk about Games Master. There is a lovely podcast out there called Under Consoletation, ran by some friends of the channel, for all of that, so make sure you do go check that out. Instead, we are here to discuss a game. One of those games that I've noticed is a title that you can mention to people of a certain generation and you immediately see their eyes light up. It's the sort of game that was played by many, there's a massive fondness for, but for some reason you don't tend to see people mention it as much anymore. Yeah, you can mention it to these people and you'll get this enthusiastic response either for that or one of its 16-bit sequels. I am, of course, talking about Desert Strike: Return to the Gulf. Developed and published by Electronic Arts, Desert Strike was originally released for the Sega Mega Drive, before being ported to a wide variety of systems, one of which was the Amiga, which is where I first played it. Desert Strike marked the start of the Strike series. It would be followed up by two sequels in the 16-bit era, which were Jungle Strike and Urban Strike, before making the leap to the 32-bit era with Soviet Strike and Nuclear Strike. Now, there was a sixth game in the works called Future Strike, but this was ultimately scrapped for whatever reason, but elements of it were rolled into the game Future Cop LAPD. Now, as a kid, Desert Strike was a game that I initially bounced off of. I was young, the game was difficult, didn't really know what I was doing, and it wasn't until a good friend of mine came over and we kind of persevered with it, we learnt how to play it properly, and I think we also found a cheat code that gave you 10 lives, which definitely helped. But from that moment on, I really grew to love the game. I was never able to complete it when I was younger, but I think I managed to get to about the third level, and then I think we moved on from the Amiga to the PlayStation, so it became one of those games that I remembered fondly, never did go back to. I did, however, get into and love Soviet Strike on the PlayStation. One of the reasons I remember getting that is, again, being younger, being, that young age. I remember seeing, like, a list of funny cheat codes in, I think it was Power Station back in the day, and that kind of led me to get it, and I thought, oh wow, this is like Desert Strike. This is the sequel to that, so I fell in love with it. Again, never did complete it, but do have it now and want to go back to it. So, what is Desert Strike all about? Well, taking some inspiration from the First Gulf War, Desert Strike is set in an unspecified Middle Eastern land, and it's about a conflict between the United States and an insane dictator called General Kilbarber. It's certainly not subtle. You play as the pilot of an Apache helicopter, and it is your job to go into each location, complete a variety of objectives such as destroying enemy installations, capturing enemies, rescuing hostages, all the while ensuring you manage your chopper's fuel, ammunition and armour. It's a very, very simple premise, but incredibly engaging and challenging, which we'll talk about more when it comes to the gameplay. Now, when the game released, it received widespread critical acclaim. There was some criticism directed towards it because of the subject matter, which, as mentioned, was about as subtle as being punched in the face. A lot of reviewers found it to be a refreshing change of pace compared to other shoot-em-ups of the time, though, and an essential purchase. Now, Desert Strike is one of those titles that I'm kind of surprised isn't available easily nowadays. It and its 16-bit sequels seem like absolute no-brainers for a cheeky trilogy pack on the likes of an Evercade or any kind of Classics collection. The PSP did have an EA Classics collection that they popped up in though, and I'm fairly sure one of the Mega Drive mini consoles, I think the Mega Drive Mini 2, had it attached. But that has been about it really, unfortunately, but it's a shame for one of those fondly remembered titles. So I wanted to make a video about it for a few reasons. One, it finally gives me a reason to go back and complete it. I wanted to see how it held up nowadays, and hopefully introduce it to people who might not know the series and encourage them to give it a go. So, let's get on with the game. We load up the game and we get a very no frills menu, but some absolutely banging menu music. We're offered a few options here. The first thing I want to do is go into the options menu because I want to change my control method. Desert Strike offers you 3 different styles for controlling the chopper. With momentum is your default option and aims to be the most realistic option. You have to turn your chopper yourself with left and right on the D-pad, then the speed of the chopper is also taken into account when coming to a stop. It says it's with momentum. From the cockpit is similar to the above one, but you don't get that inertia when you're stopping the helicopter. And finally you have the from above option, where the chopper moves in the direction you're holding on the D-pad. From above is generally considered to be the easiest option to take from the research I did on the game, I suppose because it's much more direct and arcade-like than the other ones. We return to the main menu. I can now select my co-pilot. I opt for Keith Michaels out of the 2 on offer to me right now because, again, after doing a little bit of research, he's said to be the better option. I'm not sure how much difference it truly makes, but from my understanding your co-pilots have different speeds for the winch, as well as performing better or worse when it comes to targeting. So controls and co-pilot set, into the game we go. We get a very basic cutscene where a man with a pointy stick points at things and tells us about the madman and his plans. We get our list of objectives, which admittedly seems like an awful lot to do for 2 men in 1 chopper, but we are more than capable. So it's into the chopper and away from the aircraft carrier we go. Levels in Desert Strike play like this. You have your map, you have your objectives, and you can carry out active ones generally in any order you like. Some objectives may be hidden and rely on you completing another one beforehand, in which case it'll list them out but just shows random question marks on the map to say there's no intel. Now, I'm going to go back to the point about completing missions in any order. That's certainly possible, but actually it's not really recommended. As an example, Mission 1 wants us to destroy some radar stations, then some power stations, and then some airfields. You could go for the airfields first, but they're guarded by some pretty tough enemies which will probably destroy you quite rapidly. If you do the radar stations first and then the power stations, you'll gain certain bonuses, like the enemies might be a bit weaker, they might do less damage, or they'll take longer to spot you. So yes, you could do them in any order, but you're likely making it a lot harder for yourself. Alongside our various objectives, we can also find, via the pause map, items to pick up and keep our chopper well stocked, soldiers who have gone MIA, certain enemy types, and landing zones to drop off captured enemies or people we have rescued. So onwards to the radar fields. So we'll talk about the controls while we make our way there. My previous experience with the game has always been with the momentum controls, which I assume are the way the game is meant to be played, but almost immediately I can feel the benefit of swapping to the from above option. It's a lot easier to control the chopper, it's a lot more responsive, and easier to approach objectives and enemies. Unfortunately, despite the controls being easier and more responsive, it does not make up for me being awful. And fairly early in, I fanny about trying to capture a soldier whilst there's incoming fire and I'm promptly destroyed. So let it be known, the controls might be a bit easier, but it's still bloody punishing. Anyway, we destroy the radar site and we move on to the next objective, which is some power stations, before going on to tackle the airfields. This is where one of the other main parts of the game come into play. You can't just go from location to location, completing the objectives one after the other. As you're playing, you have limited ammunition for your weapons. Your cannons are usually fine with having over 1,000 bullets, but that's a very low-powered weapon. Instead, it's your rockets and hydras that are the issue, because you're going to be using those to take out the more armoured enemies and buildings. So as they deplete, you're going to need to replenish them. In addition to this, as you fly around the game world, your fuel is constantly ticking down. It hits 0, you're going to crash, so you need to replenish that too. Fortunately, the game has ample ammo and fuel pickups scattered across the maps, and also hidden within some of the buildings. So whilst things might get a little bit hairy, you should be able to get yourself sorted. This is a big part of it though, because sometimes you're going to need to take these detours to refuel or whatever before going on to the next objective. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself stranded and running out of fuel. The first level continues until we get to the command centre. It's destroyed and a little fella runs out, which we managed to capture. Capturing enemies and rescuing MIAs is fairly easy. You hover your chopper near to them, a winch will drop down and they'll get snagged up by it. It's definitely worth looking for the MIAs because some of them will unlock additional co-pilots to use at later stages. So the little dude grabbed, he reveals where to go for our last objective, finding a missing agent, and off we go. We blast open a secret entrance, let our co-pilot rush inside to grab him, while we defend the area from waves of oncoming enemies. Soon it's over and we're on our merry way back to the carrier to finish off the first mission. There's a brief breakdown of how many points we got for our objectives and various other things before we are given our list of goals for the next mission and a bit of an update on the plot. Now mission 2 isn't dissimilar to mission 1 if I'm being honest, so I won't dwell on it too much. I didn't really find this one to be too much of a step up in difficulty, if any step up at all, but there is one interesting thing to do in the mission. One of your objectives is to find and destroy a number of Scud launchers scattered across the map. The game does not tell you where these Scud launchers are, so in order to do that, you need to first find and capture a number of enemy commanders who will give up the locations one by one. This is also coupled with a couple of missions where you have to locate and rescue a number of prisoners. Your chopper can only handle a certain amount at once, so you'll need to go back and forth to landing zones a fair amount. So this is kind of a good lesson in being able to manage your resources. Now mission 2 is complete, not dissimilar for mission 3. The step up in difficulty isn't too bad again, but this is a mission where you do have to do the objectives one after the other, as each one kind of gives up a little bit more info for the next one. The awkward mission in this one is locating these missile solos you need to destroy. The general location will get marked on your map, but when you get there you'll find there's nothing there except some sand dunes. So what you need to do is shoot at these sand dunes to reveal the missile silo, and then you'll need to destroy that itself. This is another mission, like mentioned, you have to be very careful with your resources. I did find myself running out of fuel once or twice, or got very close. And finally, we wrap that mission up and come to mission 4, the finale. The madman is ready to go full ham and bomb everything and everywhere, and it's up to us to stop them. This mission undergoes a little bit of change. It's set at night, and to be honest, I found this to be a significant step up in difficulty. With this one, you have to do the missions in order, but you can stray into the wrong area, and the enemies here will be incredibly tough in those areas until you've completed the prior objectives, so be very, very careful. And this mission has you doing all sorts. You need to stop these oil leaks, you need to stop the enemy from torching oil fields, you need to track down these garbage trucks carrying nuclear weaponry, and to do that you need to actually follow them around and guess which one, well not guess, but figure out which is the right one based on looking at them from behind. And then you've got the eventual showdown with the madman himself. It's a bloody fun time, fairly difficult and nervy towards the end, as the final battle has you stopping him as he's escaping. You have to dodge enemies and make sure you're managing your resources. Still, about an hour or so later, we're done and the game is complete. We've saved America and the world itself, and we even get this cheeky animation of our pilot and co-pilot getting congratulated on the lawn of the White House by the president. Truly brings a tear to your eye. That all said, let's wrap up the review and the video. Took about 4 to 5 hours to complete Desert Strike, and it felt really good to revisit this game from my childhood that I never really got around to completing. It wasn't quite the same experience as a game like Siphon Filter or Tomb Raider 2, but it was still really, really fun to go back to it and see how it held up nowadays. I think because of when the game came out and the relative simplicity of the gameplay, it is a game that feels quite timeless, and it's easy for anyone to pick up and play nowadays. It, to me, is something that could be re-released nowadays for a few quid on any of your online stores as part of a pack of the free, and be really, really fun. I think maybe you probably have to add in a few of the usual modern conveniences that come with re-releases of these old games, a rewind function, save states, but you probably wouldn't need to do too much. There admittedly isn't too much more to say than that. Desert Strike was really fun to go back to, it's made me eager to play the others in the series, and I just keep coming back to this point that it's a little bit of a shame or weird that we have not seen this series re-released in some form. It's a title I would recommend to anyone wanting to go get into the retro scene, and one I imagine many from that era would be eager to play again. Holds up really, really well. Sometimes with this, it's really fun to go back and revisit a game and find out it's still really, really fun. It can put a smile on your face, and sometimes that's all we want from a video game. So that said, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Please do share your memories of the game in the comments below, or rest of the games in the series, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. Goodbye.